Goodfellas is one of Martin Scorsese's classic gangster movies, perhaps one of his best. It tells the story of a man and his time with the mob and how it all falls apart. The film was made in 1990, looking back on the late 80s, a time known for its consumerism. The film shows the decade through the eyes of Henry Hill, our protagonist. We see the rise and fall of consumerism through Henry, who takes the role of an average Joe during this period. In this video, I will draw parallels between Henry's character with the causes and effects of consumerism. Before we begin, I'd like to give a basic definition of what consumerism and consumerism in the 1980s entails. So consumerism is spending money on useless objects to feel good, or relying solely on an object for a source of happiness. And in the 1980s, this was very prevalent, where people... It was a reaction to the 1970s, which was a time where spending small was very important in the American mind. And now there was all this money, and the White House had sent a president to spend money under Reagan. People began spending a lot more money on things that they didn't need. And so this created a rise of a major retail chains, malls, and department stores because people wanted to buy things easier. And so these were created to solve that problem. And another result of this was the drug problem, the war on drugs, and especially on cocaine. Now, I would say that this is consumerism. Drugs are the biggest result of consumerism, as it is relying solely on objects as a source of happiness, as drugs are. So my first point draws off the beginning of a movie where we see Henry's home life. He grows up in a small apartment with his parents and with his siblings, and life is not very easy for him. You know, his family doesn't have a lot of money. He gets abused physically by his father, and things are rough. And so this is very similar to the people of the 1970s, where there was not a lot of money to spend in the 1970s. People had to live very frugally. And so what you see is the 1980s are a reaction to this time, where now that there's all this money, people just spend it on anything that, seems appealing. Just like Henry. As soon as he's done with his family and he moves on, and he begins working with the mafia full time, he has all of this money that he just uses to spend on suits and useless things. The next point I'd like to discuss involves Jimmy. And so Jimmy, all you really need to know is that he's just been involved in a heist with the other crew members, excluding Tommy and Henry, his two friends. And so they've stolen $5 million, and he's supposed to distribute the money out to his friends. But instead what he does is he keeps it for himself. And what he does is he ends up killing everybody else who he's supposed to give the money to. And this is a pretty awful thing to do. But it's also a really good example of consumerism, where you put your desire for money and wealth above that of your friends, And this is like a very big extreme, but at the same time, I think it serves as a great example. So my third point involves the drug problem of the 1980s, which was a huge result of consumerism, where you are taking a substance to feel good about yourself, right? And so Henry uses a lot of cocaine in the movie. I mean, he uses a lot of it. And so it becomes his only source of joy. And it cuts him off from the mafia after his arrest. Okay, so the second time he gets arrested, right, the mafia is basically done with him. Paulie finds out that he's been using drugs, which is a huge no-no in the mafia. And Jimmy wants him dead because he thinks he's ratted out the entire mob family. And so that's when he goes into witness protection, and that is when the film is essentially over. So my final point I'd like to make is that of the death of small mom and pop stores that occurred from the rise of consumerism in the 80s. So with the 1980s, you see huge retail chains pop up, malls, department stores, Walmart, stuff like that. And it really comes in here and replaces all of these small mom and pop stores that have been there for a long time. And so this is reflected in the film as the death of a family farm. So I'm going to show you this clip here.
Carbone. And then there was Mo Black's brother, Fat Andy, and his guys, Frankie the Wop, Freddie No Nose. And then there was Pete the Killer, who was Sally Balls' brother.
Took care of that thing for you.
And you had Nicky Eyes.
What's up, guy?
And Mikey Francesi.
That guy, yeah, I want to see him.
And Jimmy Two Times, who got that nickname because he said everything twice, like...
I'm gonna go get the papers,
What we see here is a family. We barely know these people, and we already feel so invited into their lives, just like a normal family. And the sad part is that we know that by the end of a film, everybody's either dead or in prison, you know? And that's really disheartening. And it shows a great way to reflect the 1980s where, yes, you know, things were very cheap, and you were able to have this great rise in stores, but in the end, all of these, you know, family-owned stores and stores owned by your friends, you know, are gone now because, you know, you screwed them over because you were the one spending the money at the big stores. And the main message to take away from this film is family and friends are more important than material things and wealth in general.